Podcast was recorded, produced, and created within the territory of Mi'kma'ki, the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq. Our relationship and our privilege to live on this territory was agreed upon in the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1752. Because of this treaty relationship, it is to be acknowledged that we are all treaty people and have a responsibility to respect this territory.
Today, we're honored to welcome Dr. Seth Greenwald, whose journey has been nothing short of extraordinary. Dr. Greenwald's path to higher education began serendipitously with a chance meeting in Sackville, leading him to become a proud member of the Mount Allison community. Since leaving the pond, he's earned advanced degrees at Columbia University, MIT, and Oxford, where he completed the first PhD in orthopedic and engineering sciences. A pioneer in orthopedic engineering and the director of orthopedic research laboratories, Dr. Greenwald has dedicated his career to advancing artificial joint technology and improving patient outcomes. Dr. Greenwald, Seth, we're thrilled to have you join us on When Ducks Leave the Pond. Welcome.
Privileged to be here.
Oh, it's just such a joy to be able to connect with you again. And I'm just going to pour right into it. I've got a lot of questions for you because, as I mentioned earlier, Seth, your journey into higher education began during an unplanned visit to Sackville, where you accidentally met up with University Registrar Christine McGinnis. Can you share with us more about that pivotal encounter and how it influenced your decision to attend Mount Allison?
Okay, well, interestingly enough, Carol, I graduated from high school in 1955, George Washington High School in New York City, Manhattan, actually Manhattan Island, which made me a natural maritimer below the border. And I had a friend that I had grown up with whose family came from Port Gravel, Nova Scotia. And they asked me if I wanted to go on holiday with them for 2 weeks in August 1955. And of course, I jumped at the chance to get out of the city. And we ended up in Port Gravel, Nova Scotia, not far from Paulsboro, on the way to Sackville. And we stayed at Joe's grandma's, and I remember just totally. She lived by herself. She was in her 80s, and what I remember most distinctly was I'd never been out of the country, let alone New York City, and so she lived by herself, and Joe's dad used to go up every year and cut the firewood for her, so she'd have a winter's worth of firewood. And I remember you're a lovely lady. And what really struck me was over her mantelpiece was a picture of the Queen. I hadn't realized that Canada was still a dominion of the British Empire. I always thought it was that country to the north. Well, Joe and I, being adventuresome kids, we started hitchhiking around. We were going to buy a piece of land and build a cabin on it.
Oh, good plan.
We had $500 between us. And we happened into Sackville. And of course, Joe being he was more aware of girls than I was. I was 16 going on 17, but I hadn't quite appreciated the fairer sex yet. So we ended up in Mel's, and Joe was a tall, good-looking, blonde-haired kid, and he dominated the focus of all these Canadian young ladies. And I said, Joe, I'm going to walk up the street. And I walked up the street and saw a sign, "Welcome to Mount Allison University, home of the Mounties." And being curious, I walked up the street, 3 very ivy-covered sandstone buildings, and I walked to Centennial Hall on Saturday, and to my surprise, there was this lady at the end of a long counter. She asked me who I was, and I said, "I'm Alan Seth Greenwald, and I'm from New York City." And that started a conversation that went on for a couple hours. My plan was to go home and join my buddies and we were all going to go in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
I came from a rather, I came from a small corner in New York City, upper end of Manhattan Island, and Washington Heights area. And of course, you can always tell a New Yorker, not only by his accent, you can tell a New Yorker, but you can't tell him much. And that was sort of my demeanor. My world rose and set. And we started this conversation, and Miss McGinnis said to me after a few questions, she said, do you ever think about going to college? I said, not after my high school performance. And entered my mind. I was going to go in the military anyway. And this conversation went on for a while. And she insisted I call my mother. We didn't even have a phone. I had the neighbor's phone as an emergency contact. And when I got my mom, I said, go up to George Washington High School, get my grades, and send them up as such. And then about a week later, 2 weeks later, probably, I was back in New York, and I got this letter from Mount A saying I had a provisional acceptance. I was accepted on probation for a year if I could pass a test in Spanish. It was ironic because I took Spanish in high school, but failed it 3 times. And so I figured, oh, well, why not? Room, board, and tuition was only $900. And between the money I raised working after school, the $500 my grandpa left me, and my parents chipping in, we had the $900 tuition for a year and then some. So I came up to Mount Allison in the fall of 1955 and registered. I had to take a Spanish test, and I forget, Professor Mamou was a French teacher. He administered the exam. And so he asked me, he said, yo hablo el español. And I said, muy poco, yo aprende en la escuela. And this went on for about a minute. And he said, you can speak Spanish. I said, not really. I mean, I had a lot of Puerto Rican friends, and I knew some of the words. I could read the El Diario de Nueva York, which was the Spanish-speaking newspaper. And after we talked about it, he says, "You don't have to take a test. You're passed." So,
it's too bad your high school teachers didn't know that.
Oh God, no! I couldn't decline a sentence in English or Spanish, as it turned out. But that was a lack of my education. Nobody else's. So anyway, bottom line was, because it was such a late acceptance, I was living in a house off campus with a group of Chinese students from Hong Kong. And their English wasn't all that good, and my Mandarin was non-existent. So, but I wanted to go out for the football team at 112 pounds soaking wet. And they had just switched from rugby to Canadian football. So I went out for the team, and I had visions of being a running back. The only problem was I could run, but I ate so much maritime dust every time I got tackled. The tryouts weren't very good, but there was a guy there named Walter Watson Peters.
Yeah. Now we've talked, and I actually got to spend time with you and Walter. I think at one of the reunions early on.
Mm-hmm.
And Seth, like on that, that first day at Mount Allison, you met Walter, and he's had a profound impact on your time.
He did.
Tell us more about how you met, and for those who are listening who don't know who Walter Peters is, Captain Peters was the first person of African Canadian descent to become a jet pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He went on to have a distinguished career as a military aviator and aviation expert. And Seth, you've described him as your best friend during those years. So share a bit more with us how the two of you met and why that friendship was so special.
Well, it was special because we both were going out for the football team, and he was a running back that could really run. He was my size, but about 170 pounds of nothing but pure muscle. And he came from St. John High in St. John, New Brunswick. And the only difference was he could play, and I aspired to play. after getting mouthfuls of maritime red dust, I realized that wasn't my calling. I did elevate to become the assistant manager of the team, and Bub, we got to be natural friends right away because he was really a star, and he asked me where I was bunking, and I said, well, I'm living off campus, and he said, would you like to live on campus? And I said, I'd love to. So he says, go pack your trunk. So we went down to my room and I packed my trunk and we dragged across campus to the academy. And he was in a room with another fellow who hadn't quite showed up yet. And he, we took all the guy's belongings and moved them to another room. And I moved in with my trunk. And I got Dean Tuck, who was a sociology professor, he was the house monitor. He comes down with his clipboard. He said, yeah. And Bob opens up. He says, "Yeah, I'm Peters, and this is Greenwald." He says, he looks down and he says, "I don't have a Greenwald listed yet." And Bob, who was he was a scholarship star, he said, "Yeah, he's my roommate."
And that was it.
The guy wrote my name down and walked out of the room. So we were friends. I actually, he was the first Afro-Canadian jet fighter pilot, and he managed the Snowbirds.
That's right.
Stunt team in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. And long story short, if you check, you'll probably find out that he was the first Afro-Canadian to go to Mount Allison. There were lots of
folks from the islands, the Caribbean islands, but yeah, he was definitely one of the first. There's no doubt about that. And you'll be pleased to know, Seth, that this is the 100th anniversary of the Air Force in Canada. And in fact, there's all kinds of things all over Canada to celebrate that over the year. Yeah. And so if you're walking in and out of, say, an Irving store, you will see a prop-up banner with a certain focus on certain of the veterans who have been through the Air Force, and one of the very prominent ones is Walter. So every time I walk in and out of Irving this year in Canada and in other areas, you see his image and what he accomplished, and I think you'd be really proud of him.
Well, we became sort of inseparable. I believe we may have integrated the dorms because he was the first Afro-Canadian to work to room with this white Jewish guy from New York City. we sort of bonded immediately, and we were just good pals. We did everything together, and he was a football star. Once he hit the line, if you couldn't tackle him, and he was hard to tackle because he wasn't that tall, and he was gone. Yeah, it was a very interesting transition from rugby to football, and I was taken by the whole admonition of going to Canada because I got used to being a Dominion of the British. They had a Governor General. The guy's name was Massey. I always get it mixed up. Massey's, I don't know if it was Vincent Massey or Raymond Massey. Raymond Massey was, I think, the actor. It was his brother. He was appointed by the Queen, and every place I went, and I was really taken by it. We sang "God Save the Queen."
That's right. Well, of course, in the past 2 years since Her Majesty passed away, every time I hear "God Save the King," it's still striking. We as Canadians, we sang it so much with the Queen, and all of a sudden we have the word "King," and it's still striking to us, I think.
Yeah,
Seth. Reflecting.
You go ahead. It's become sort of "Oh Canada" too now.
That's right. That's right.
Go ahead.
So, reflecting on your time at Mount A, you went from a high school, thinking you were going to go into the Marines. How did your time at Mount Allison and the university environment and the experiences you had here shape your academic and professional trajectory? I mean, I've touched on it, but you've had and are having an incredible career, leading you from that first kind of challenging year, trying to get through your Spanish, to the distinguished career you have in orthopedic engineering. What was it about this place that set you in motion?
Well, one thing for sure, it was about 1,000 miles north of the corner I grew up on. most of my buddies in New York were Irish, and my brother and I hung out with. It was a very mixed neighborhood I grew up in, and there was there were Greeks and Italians and um, a lot of Jewish refugees from the concentration camps, and it was a very mixed blue collar neighborhood. And like I told you before, you can always tell a New Yorker, but you can't tell them much. And I had that attitude. But I going north to Canada was 1,000 miles north of New York City, and it was cold there. Not that New York wasn't cold, but I was a real long distance from home, and I sort of buckled down. I wanted to be an engineer because my dad, it was the only word I could think of. My dad was a mechanical engineer by training, and so I registered for a degree in physics and an engineering certificate. At that point in time, Mount Allison was it had a strong theology department, business department, home economics, and the engineering program was really superb. It was the first 3 years of an engineering degree, and you took the last two at Nova Scotia Technical College, which became part of Dalhousie, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
or McGill. And so I registered for both, and I struggled that first year. Fortunately, everything was on a year basis, but I was determined that I wasn't going to pass out and fail. I was investing what I thought was a small fortune to go there for a year,
That's right.
and I wasn't going to let my dad down. And I remember my dad so distinctly saying to me, "Don't ever do anything. Always stick up for your brother, and don't ever do anything that brings shame or hardship to your family." And I thought, "Oh my God, I got to do
No
well up here."
pressure. No pressure, Dad.
Yeah. So I fortunately that first Christmas, everything was based on a year basis. I think I was failing 5 out of 6 courses, but by the time the spring came, I had pulled it right. And then I began to realize, that maybe there is something to this academics. So I was no means I ever thought of myself as being the smartest, but I was probably one of the hardest working. So that first year at Mount A, it was interesting. It was now I realize Mount A is regarded as one of the better or best undergraduate liberal arts colleges in Canada. Although I'm not sure I enjoyed that distinction at the time, but I thought the engineering and the physics department was just superb. As I look back on it, it was some of the most formative educational experience I had. And in terms of liberal arts, gosh, I took 4 years of German, year of sociology, 2 years of English, history. I had a mixture of engineering and physical science, along with a real large dose of liberal arts topics. And I think it rounded me as an individual and made me also realize that you could you could learn all that I didn't know everything I thought I knew, and I grew a lot that first year. And I must say, Miss McGinnis kept an eye on me, and I'm sure lots of other kids on campus to make sure we were getting along okay. After that first year, I realized that I had I really began to enjoy academics, never having really exposed to them in New York. And by the by, every everyone, and I had left the small corner. I referred to it as a small corner because it was every all the kids that I grew up with, they did go as a group into the Marine Corps, and they ended up graduating. They became like their parents. They became dock workers, policemen, and sanitation workers, et al. And I sort of left that, and that was my horizon back then. And then I had bigger horizons, and Mount Allison really manifest and gave me a chance to mature and to recognize a sense of my own worth. And I thought that the exposure I had was unbelievable in terms of educational value. So it was a
Can,
go ahead.
no, thank you. I remember hearing your story many years ago for the first time and thinking how it must have been for you to walk from Mel's up to the campus. Now, but when you left Mount Allison and you went on to pursue a bunch of really important degrees, you actually weren't going to originally get into orthopedics. There was a whole
Yeah,
other path. And can you explain to us what happened
yeah,
and how you
yeah.
took that path and then
Well,
was able to convert it into what you're doing now?
yeah. Well, like a lot of people in life, life is serendipitous, and you come to forks in your road, and uh, as Robert Frost best put it, uh, the road less traveled. Uh, and you come to a bifurcation in the road of life, and one road is faired and well cared for, and the others is indistinguishable. And you have to stand there and make a choice. When I graduated Mount Allison in May of 1959, I did so with my engineering certificate and degree in physics. And I had done well in physics and had an assistantship to Wesleyan University because of Mount Allison in Middletown, Connecticut. So I went there. And when I got there, I learned very quickly that my mind is more bent towards putting together experiments and physical concepts than it would be in theoretical physics. So I ended up going to work for the Boeing Airplane Company in Seattle, Washington, and was there for a while, and then moved back east. And I worked on some the lunar landing, the Saturn moon rocket. I worked in a advanced design group, and the experiences were unbelievable. And I had really a great grounding in physics at Mount A. In fact, it was really good. And I know the engineering has disappeared now from Mount Allison, but between the engineering and the physics, it was wonderful. I then transitioned to a company in New York called the Republic Aviation, and they were designing a fighter bomber of the Vietnam War called the F-105 Thunder Chief. And I was assigned to work on helping design with about 100 other engineers, and we did. And after a while, my boss told me that I had to get a degree in aeronautical engineering if I wanted to stay with the company. And there was only one place to get it, and that was MIT. So by then I got married, and off I went to MIT in Boston, where I got my master's degree on a pretty important problem that was well funded by the government, as it turned out, by the Defense Department. It had to do with the vibrations of fluid going through propellant lines and how you keep them stable from blowing up. So when I finished at at MIT, I was going to stay there and get my doctorate. But my advisor said, they had an identical problem like this in England at a nuclear generating facility called Ferry Bridge. They had these long 300-foot high reinforced shells of concrete called cooling towers. They're neck to middle. And what they do, their function is they would take water from a river, cool the reactor, turn to superheated steam, and then come back the superheated steam along the inside wall of these cooling towers as cold water and get recirculated. Just prior to finishing them and turning on the reactor, the cooling towers began to vibrate and collapse. And my advisor at MIT said, you solved this problem. That was the subject of your master's thesis. So we wrote to a colleague he knew in Oxford, and the guy was really excited. His name was Hemp. As it turned out, he was a structural engineer. So we packed up and went to England. And I guess it was partly also, but I knew about Oxford. Everybody at Mount A, the guys who were really smart in physics and mathematics, they wanted to go to Oxford or Cambridge. That was it was still the mother country, you have to realize.
That's right. That's right.
So I get to Oxford, and to go to Oxford, you have to be accepted by the university, and then you have to join a college, and they have to accept you. So I joined a place called Keble College. As it turned out, its roots were ecclesiastical about 1870. Not the ones that go back to the time of the Battle of Hastings. It was a little more modern. But anyway, there's a note on my mailbox that says, "Dear Greenwald," they were very informal. "Unfortunately, I'm not here to meet you. I'm on sabbatical, and I'll be in East Africa pursuing my hobby, which is ornithology. but you're a seasoned engineer, get on with it. By then, I had worked 4 or 5 years in the aerospace industry. So that was called getting on with it. So I said, my God, why the heck did I leave Boston? So I go down to I did the best thing any red-blooded American would do. I found a pub, the King's Arms, opposite the Bodleian Library, which is Oxford's library. And, and I ordered a pint of best bitter, and I'm there looking down at the beer thinking, my God, what am I doing here? It's raining out. We just found out my wife was going to have our first child. And, oh, my God. And there were two guys standing next to me, well-dressed Englishmen. Why they started a conversation with me still baffles me. Well, it must have been my accent. Well, we started. One was a pathologist, one was an orthopedic surgeon. As it turned out, the surgeon guy named John Goodfellow was very prominent, and the pathologist Peter Bullough, was one of three in the United Kingdom at the time. He ended up going to the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York and became their chief pathologist. In the end, they said to me, "We have a problem. Don't worry about your problem." So what are you guys talking about? We're trying to locate the weight-bearing surfaces in the normal human hip and repair the contact areas to areas of cartilage breakdown, which we'll describe as osteoarthritis. And today's contemporary solution is a joint replacement. And you're just the guy to solve this problem. I said, solve the problem? I don't even think I could spell orthopedics. And he said to me, oh, don't worry, that's not a problem. So I went up to the Nuffield Orthopedic Center, which is Oxford's Department of Orthopedic Surgery, and honestly, I never left.
Wow.
Solved the problem, but I was forever captured by orthopedics, and it was a lot of engineering. It was a lot of pathology. I had to cut up an awful lot of cadavers to get the hip joints I needed to do this research. And I went to surgery hundreds of times, and I finished, solved the problem, and they wanted me to stay and take another year or two, probably another year to get a degree in medicine, and then I could take a residency in surgery. And I said, wait a minute, I cut up enough cadavers to realize that's not my calling. I'm a scientist, and I'll probably contribute more as a scientist than I ever would as a surgeon. And so that was how I got into it. And then I took a job at Imperial College after a while, which is the UK's MIT equivalent. And from there, I ended up going to the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, and I developed their orthopedic engineering. And I was captured not only by the basic pathology of joint degeneration, but also implants, particularly hips and knees, were getting to be popular. And I've been involved in that ever since. And education, I love to teach. And I figured if I could teach engineering students, I would have no trouble with residents and orthopedic surgeons. That's how it all turned out. But that's how I got in it. And I've been in it a long time since we got to Oxford in 1967, and I guess I could say that was when I first got into
it.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I guess what the point I want to make to the folks who are listening in, you don't know this, but if you or someone you love or know has a hip or knee replacement, has had one, more than likely, 99% chance that Seth Greenwald has either designed it, or he's tested it, or he's taught someone how to properly use those things. There's not an orthopedic surgeon in North America who doesn't know who you are, not one who hasn't attended one of your education sessions, one of your conferences. If you speak to any orthopedic surgeon in North America, they know who Seth Greenwald is. So we're really proud of that, Seth. We're proud of the trajectory of your career in this very specific field. I find it interesting, like, again, serendipity, right? You went somewhere, you had a conversation, and you went from 10 years in aerospace to this long career in this type of orthopedic engineering. So There you go. Seth, as you've spoken about the impact of the liberal arts education you've had. It- I want to touch back a bit about what you were saying about teaching and mentorship and the role that individuals like Christine McGuinness has had on your life. So in 1981, you established a bursary at Mount Allison to honor Christine McGuinness, who was, we think, the first female university registrar in Canada. And really, you did it to acknowledge the pivotal role she had in your career and your education. How do you view the importance of mentorship in academia? And what impact did you hope this bursary would have on future students?
Well, a great question. I established the bursary as a means of what I consider to be giving back. Mount A gave me a great deal. It gave me a career. It gave me maturity. And it also gave me the reality that if you worked hard, whether you were brilliant or just average, but if you worked hard, you could achieve anything. And it gave me that sort of confidence, that never say die attitude, that you could always do everything. And what I consider to be giving back, it means that you want to give back by teaching somebody something. Could be a student, an undergraduate student, could be a grad student, a resident, or a practicing orthopedic surgeon. In my instance, you could contribute to their education and pass that torch along. And quite frankly, to me, that represents what I believe is, which I would define as mentorship. Mentorship is you make education possible for people, and you mentor people by indirectly they read things you've done, or you directly have contact with them and you teach. And I consider that bursary to be just that. That it would be available for anybody in need of the funds to get an education. Whether it was in medicine, liberal arts, or whatever, that had the passion and just kind of ease their path a little along the way. And that's what that was all about. And that's why I did it.
Well, we certainly thank you for that. It's been impactful. It's been and we've just every time I see or meet one of the recipients, of course, I think of you and not only Christine. So thank you on behalf of all of us. Now, Seth, you had an interview in or a podcast called The Titans of Orthopaedics. And it was a series where you discussed the evolution of orthopedic practices. And for those of us who might be facing orthopedic surgery in the near future or not so near future, what advances do you foresee in the next decade? And how should upcoming professionals prepare for these changes?
Well, I would put it this way: the sine qua non of a successful hip or knee replacement is fundamentally a triad, and the triad is simply designing materials, and we really have optimized their utilization in a surgical procedure, and they've evolved to where if you were you were a candidate and needed a joint replacement, it would last you, and you were 60 years old, it would last you until the end of time, or the end of your space on Earth. Second is your perception as a patient, and you're not. Everybody thinks they're going to be 21 years old again. That's not the case. But if you're pain-free, you have a reasonable good motion, and can enjoy the activities of daily living, it's a success. And the third thing is technical proficiency, and that lies with the surgeon. And a lot of the work that I've been involved in has been the construct of educational courses. I started one that turned out to be very large indeed, called Current Consequence Joint Replacement, where you could get orthopedic surgeons of note and prominence to lecture to other orthopedic surgeons. we more or less have not understood the etiologies and prevention of osteoarthritis, but we have a methodology of treating it, and that's called artificial joint replacements. So what I would perceive as the next step, and it's how I got started actually. I got started interested in the pathology of a disease process and ended up working very heavily in orthopedic implants, which is a solution to the problem. But the cure of the problem, the biological cure of the problem, lies in what's going to happen over the next decade. We're going to learn more and more about not just the causes of degenerative joint disease, and I mean by that osteoarthritis predominantly, but we're also going to learn about how we can interdict it in such a way as that the body's biology might be able to heal it, in which case it'll be an alternative to joint replacements. And I think that that's down the stream. And just to give you a perspective of where it is, there are approximately 2 million artificial hips and knees put in the United States on an annual basis, and that more than doubles on a global basis. So if we could interdict the disease process short of an artificial implant, we'll be making a big step forward. And I think there's a lot of research going on down at the genetic level that is going to give us clues and hopefully improve.
So you're talking about medication and vaccines?
Well, medications using cells and using biological entities to help cure a process.
Wow.
I mean, if I wanted to tell you, if we could somehow interdict diseased cartilage and assist its regrowth, which is not a simple thing to do, I think we will have begun to solve a problem.
Did you ever imagine when you were at Oxford that this would be the next 10 years?
Well, no, I thought I was going to solve the problem in 3 years. It didn't work out like that.
Oh, but you solved a lot of other problems, Seth.
Yeah, I got more involved in artificial implants rather than biological interdiction to solve the problem. But it's definitely on the horizon, and I would say that in the next decade is going to see work in that regard. I also think it's going to the educational. We robotics is used in many areas of medicine, but it's beginning to be used in orthopedics to help surgeons place with great accuracy the components that are used in joint replacements in the body.
Wow.
So I think there's a whole future in front of us, and it's rather exciting. And I think quite honestly, the value of a global, well-rounded education, such as what liberal arts has become at Mount Allison, is a prescription for producing a well-rounded individual. And rather than spoon-feed you a discipline, just stimulate the juices that allow for your own creativity to play a role in your own thinking, to take center stage, and to approach any problem you face in life.
I think that's the best description of liberal arts and sciences I've ever heard. Because it is a hard thing to define if you're trying to explain it to people, but I think that you nailed it right on the head.
Well, of course, one's also limited by one's own personal experiences. I think it gives you the option of learning how to think, and I think that's really important. And I think the breadth of a liberal arts education. When I was at Mount Allison, it was liberal arts, but it was also sciences. I mean, physics and engineering. They had a pretty good-sized group of engineers that were getting their certificates to go on to what became Dal and McGill to finish their engineering training. But I'll tell you, the education I got there, liberal arts, engineering, and physics was really remarkable as I look back on it. And I've been to some pretty good universities.
You certainly
And when I
have.
think about the undergraduate training I got at Mount A and the liberality of it, the ability to take uh, not only engineering and technical courses, but also liberal arts courses, really helped me a lot.
Oh,
Although I still had trouble declining sentences, I did take public speaking at Mount A, and I didn't realize how valuable that would come in down the road, and it did because I've climbed enough podiums around the world in my lifetime to realize that learning how to communicate an idea is is a pretty important thing. And
certainly
I,
is.
I mean, the kind of admonition I would always give to someone I had invited, a surgeon I invited to give a talk at a meeting that I put together, I would say, get up, and I really, if you can't say what you want to say in a few minutes, you shouldn't bother saying it. But I would always tell somebody, get up, tell the audience what you're going to say, proceed to say it, and then tell them what you said, and then sit down. And I said, in the course of that, remember, speak high, speak low, speak fast, speak slow, and remember the pregnant pause to make a point, and you'll do very well. And I learned all those things. At Oxford, they used to have a debating society. It's called the Oxford Union, and a lot of the lessons I learned there became the focus of how I would prepare a talk, how I put a meeting together. Uh, in
Yeah.
addition to all the testing that our laboratory still does. So, it's been a great run. And
Yeah.
somebody once asked me. In fact, there's a way back in 2010. There's a great article in the Record. It was put together by a gal named Sue Seaborn, and it was at Mount Allison, and it's called Joint Adventures. And it's a really good story of how I got to Mount A and what it meant to my life. At the end of it, she asked me uh, what my greatest accomplishment was, and I said to her, "Look, I'll let others judge what my accomplishments have been, but I'll refer you to something that Sir Isaac Newton said. He said he was asked at the end of his life, uh, how do you account for coming up with the laws of physics, which still exist today? That was in the 1700s, and he said, I'll never forget this. He said, "If I have seen farther, it is because I stood on the shoulders of giants," which makes you realize that it's not a single game. It's you're part of a you're part of an evolving team of people of all professions. Mount Allison really gave me the opportunity to. It really equipped me. It gave me confidence in myself. Certainly, maturity as I grew a little older, and I have to always kid the Maritimers because they would ask me where I was from, and I'd say I'm from the island. What are you
Wrong
talking
island.
about? Well, actually, Manhattan Island. Manhattan Island, and Manhattan Island is quite famous because in later years, everybody's heard about the play they did called In the Heights, and it happened on Manhattan Island, and that was the neighborhood I grew up in. But it was a little different. So I was an island boy.
Indeed. Just a bit of a different island than the one we're used to.
Yeah, yep.
This is Seth. It's hard to believe. It's zipped by as all our conversations do. To end it off, I'm going to say a word to you, and the first word that comes to mind. So I've got a few of these, and then we'll have to wish you a good day. So let's do this. It's the fun part. All right. Word number one: discovery.
Um, I would call that creativity.
Next word: aerospace. One word:
Exploration.
engineer.
Uh, problem solver.
Manhattan.
The island.
Good one. Teaching.
I would call that mentorship.
Mount Allison.
A life-sharing experience.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Dr. Greenwald. We're so happy to have been able to chat with you today. Thanks for everything that you've taught me personally, that you teach others, and for sharing your time today.
Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye, Seth. A sincere thank you to the executive producer and director of our podcast, Kay, who is the quadrant intern at the Alumni Engagement Office. A sincere thank you to them, and especially to the fine folks at CHMA FM Radio who have made all of this possible by allowing us to use their facilities here on campus.
Mount Allison strives to be a safe, respectful, and welcoming place for people of all genders, diverse sexualities, gender identities, and gender expressions through education, programming, support, and advocacy. We prioritized upholding, maintaining, and honoring that environment during the creation of this podcast.